Have you ever wondered what happens when the most powerful force in the universe faces a threat so colossal it could unravel creation itself? Today, we're stepping into a world where gods tremble, mountains shatter, and the fate of everything we know hangs by a thread. This is the story of Zeus, ruler of Olympus and master of the sky, pitted against Typhon, a being so monstrous and terrifying that ancient poets described him as a hurricane given flesh, a storm with 100 dragon heads and voices that could mimic both god and beast. It wasn't just a battle, it was the closest the cosmos ever came to annihilation. Picture this: the heavens trembling, the earth splitting open, and a roar so deafening it silences thunder itself. That's the moment Typhon emerged from the deepest pits of the earth, born from the primordial rage of Gaia, the earth herself, to seek vengeance against the gods who had overthrown her earlier children, the Titans. This wasn't just another monster, this was a cataclysm on two legs, a divine punishment sent to challenge the very order Zeus had fought to establish. Every serpentine head breathed fire and ice, every step shook the foundations of the world, and his goal was singular: to dethrone the gods and plunge the universe back into chaos. But Zeus was not just any king, he was a strategist, a warrior, and the only being with power enough to stand against the storm. What follows is a tale of cunning, raw power, and desperation, a clash that redefined what it meant to be divine. Over the next 10 minutes, we'll unravel this legendary confrontation, exploring the myths, the monsters, and the moments that decided whether order or chaos would reign forever. So settle in, open your imagination, and let's journey back to a time when the world held its breath, waiting to see who would emerge victorious, the king of the gods or the father of all monsters. To grasp the sheer magnitude of this confrontation, we must first look back at the divine politics that led to it. Zeus's victory over the Titans was absolute. Cronus and his kind were imprisoned deep within Tartarus, an abyss of suffering and darkness far below the underworld, guarded by the 100-handed hecatoncheires. For the Olympians, this was a golden age of order and their unchallenged rule. But for Gaia, the ancient Earth Mother, this victory was a profound betrayal. The Titans were her children, and their eternal torment was a wound she could not abide. She had once aided Zeus in his rise to power, but now she saw the new king of the gods as a tyrant no better than the one he had replaced. Her fury festered in the deepest, most ancient parts of the world, a rage as old as the soil and stone itself. This simmering anger culminated in an act of desperate, catastrophic creation. Gaia would forge a weapon unlike any other, a being conceived not just to challenge the gods, but to utterly unmake their world. She coupled with Tartarus itself, the personification of that bottomless pit, merging the raw, untamed chaos of the abyss with her own immense power. From this union of primordial forces, Typhon was born. He was not merely a giant or a monster, he was a living natural disaster. Ancient texts describe him as a towering horror of impossible proportions, with 100 serpent heads, each with dark, flickering tongues and eyes that burned with a terrible fire. His legs were coiled vipers, his wings could blot out the sun, and his voice was a horrifying cacophony. A symphony of roaring lions, bellowing bulls, and hissing serpents, all woven together into a sound that could shatter mortal mind. He was, in every sense, the antithesis of the ordered cosmos Zeus had built. Where Olympus represented law, beauty, and structure, Typhon was pure, unrestrained chaos. He was the embodiment of Gaia's vengeance, a storm given flesh and sent forth with a single purpose: to tear down the sky, topple the gods from their thrones, and return the universe to the formless void that existed before the reign of the Olympians. His very existence was a challenge to the concept of divine authority, and as he emerged from the pit, the earth itself convulsed in fear, setting the stage for a battle that would decide the fate of everything. If the Titans represented the old order, then Typhon was something else entirely, a force of pure, unmaking chaos. His origin story is not one of gentle birth but of deliberate, furious creation. In the wake of the Titanomachy, the great war that saw Zeus and his siblings claim the throne, the primordial earth goddess Gaia seethed with a mother's wrath. Her children, the Titans, had been defeated and imprisoned in the darkest pit of Tartarus, and she viewed this not as a necessary change of power but as a profound betrayal. She had helped Zeus secure his victory, and now he had become, in her eyes, just another tyrant. Her response was to forge the ultimate weapon, a being so powerful and terrifying that it could accomplish what the Titans could not. She turned to the most primordial and terrifying force in all existence, Tartarus itself, the void, the abyss, the personification of boundless darkness and despair. Their union was not one of love, but of vengeance, a merging of the solid earth and the infinite void to produce a child that was the antithesis of the Olympians' bright, structured cosmos. From this union, in the suffocating darkness of the Corycian cave in Cilicia, Typhon was born. This was no ordinary nursery. This cavern was a place of such deep, ancient dread that it was said to be a direct gateway to the underworld itself. And the creature that emerged was a nightmare-given form. Ancient poets like Hesiod struggled to find the words to describe his horrific appearance. He was of such immense size that his head brushed the stars, and his arms could stretch from sunrise to sunset. Instead of fingers, 100 serpent heads writhed at the ends of his hands, each with flickering black tongues and eyes that glowed with a ferocious, malevolent fire. His lower body was a mass of coiled vipers, constantly hissing and striking. Enormous wings sprouted from his back, not feathered like a bird's, but leathery and vast enough to blot out the sun, casting the world into an artificial night. Most terrifying of all was his voice, a horrifying cacophony that could shift from the roar of a lion to the bellows of a bull to the piercing hiss of a serpent. And at times it could even mimic the sound of the gods themselves, a cruel trick designed to confuse and demoralize his enemies. His very conception was an act of divine warfare. He was not born to simply exist or to find his place in the world. He was engineered for a single, catastrophic purpose, to dismantle the rule of Olympus and return the universe to the formless chaos that predated the gods. He was Gaia's revenge incarnate, a storm of fury and teeth sent to challenge the sky itself. Where Zeus represented order, law, and the bright sky, Typhon was his absolute opposite: chaos, anarchy, and the crushing darkness of the abyss. His emergence from that dreadful cave signaled the beginning of the greatest crisis the young Olympian gods would ever face. A threat so profound that it would force the mighty Zeus to confront the possibility of his own utter defeat. Even with that terrifying description, the true horror of Typhon is almost impossible for the modern mind to fully grasp. He wasn't just a large monster, he was a living, breathing cataclysm, a perversion of nature designed to be the ultimate predator of the divine. Ancient sources like Hesiod and Apollodorus paint a picture so deliberately overwhelming that it feels like they are describing a landscape of fear rather than a single being. His height wasn't just impressive, it was cosmic. When he stood to his full height, his head truly did scrape against the stars, and his arms could span the entire horizon, making the very sky his personal domain. This scale meant he wasn't just in the world, he enveloped it, threatening to crush the entire cosmos within his grasp. But it's the specifics of his form that truly chills the blood. Erupting from his shoulders and necks were not 1, not 10, but 100 ferocious dragon heads. Each head was a fully independent engine of destruction, with serpentine necks constantly writhing and twisting in a horrifying, chaotic dance. Their eyes didn't just glow, they burned with a raw, malicious fire, and their forked black tongues flickered, tasting the air for the scent of gods. Each of these monstrous heads could roar with a different, horrifying sound. The scream of a tempest, the shriek of a dying animal, or a twisted mockery of divine speech, creating a soul-shattering cacophony designed to break the will of any opponent before the fight even began. From the waist down, his form descended into a nightmare of another kind. There were no legs, only a gigantic, tangled nest of coiled viper tails, each as thick as a great tree trunk, slithering and crushing everything in their path. This lower body was constantly in motion, a seething mass of scales and muscle that scarred the earth itself as he moved, leaving behind a trail of poison and desolation. And then there were his wings. They were not the graceful, feathered wings of an eagle or a god, but vast, membranous structures like those of a colossal bat, leathery and vain. When he spread them, they were so immense they could eclipse the sun, plunging the world into a premature and terrifying twilight, a permanent midnight that heralded his coming. Fire and brimstone flashed from his countless eyes and roared from his 100 mouths, meaning he was not just a physical threat but a walking inferno. He didn't need weapons, his very body was an arsenal. This was a creature designed by the primordial forces of the universe for one purpose: to be so utterly terrifying, so overwhelmingly powerful, and so completely alien that the very concept of order would flee before him. He was the embodiment of the abyss, given a form that could climb out and challenge the sky. Yet for all his terrifying individual power, Typhon's threat was magnified 1,000-fold because he was never truly alone. He was, after all, known as the father of all monsters, and his legacy of terror was secured through his monstrous children, born from his union with the equally fearsome Etna. Often described as a nymph with the beautiful upper body of a woman and the lower body of a speckled serpent, Etna was herself a primordial being, an ageless creature of the deep earth who lived in a cave and devoured raw flesh. Together, they were a nightmare couple, and their offspring became the most iconic and formidable monsters in all of Greek mythology, a veritable army of horrors that would plague gods and heroes for generations. Their children read like a catalogue of legendary adversaries. There was Cerberus, the massive, multi-headed hound tasked with eternally guarding the gates of the underworld, ensuring the dead could not escape and the living could not enter uninvited. Then came the Lernaean Hydra, the many-headed serpent of the swamps, whose very breath was toxic and whose central head was immortal. For every head lopped off, 2 more would grow back in its place. Their brood also included the Chimera, a fire-breathing hybrid of lion, goat, and serpent that ravaged the countryside, and the Sphinx, a creature with the body of a lion, the wings of a bird, and the head of a woman who posed her deadly riddle to travelers outside Thebes. And let's not forget the Nemean lion, a beast with a hide so impenetrable that no mortal weapon could pierce it, which terrorized the lands until it was finally bested. This aspect of the myth is crucial because it connects Typhon's rebellion directly to the entire heroic age of Greece. These weren't just random monsters, they were the literal children of the greatest threat the gods ever faced. Every time a hero like Hercules, Perseus, or Bellerophon went on a quest, they were, in a very real sense, cleaning up the lingering mess from this primordial war. The famous 12 labors of Hercules, for instance, were almost entirely a mission to eradicate the spawn of Typhon and Echidna. By defeating the Nemean lion and the Lernaean Hydra, Hercules was systematically dismantling the living legacy of the monster who had nearly toppled his own father, Zeus. This creates a powerful narrative echo throughout Greek mythology, where the aftershocks of this divine near-apocalypse are felt for centuries in the struggles of mortal heroes. The battle against Typhon wasn't an isolated event. It was the foundational conflict that unleashed a wave of chaos into the world, a wave that would require immense courage and strength to finally subdue. And so this living cataclysm began his march, his singular goal fixed upon the peak of Mount Olympus. The very earth recoiled at his passing. With every step, the ground split asunder, creating new chasms that spewed forth smoke and fire. Mountains trembled and crumbled into dust, and the seas roared and boiled as his shadow fell upon them. The sound that preceded him was not a war cry, but a world-ending symphony of tempests and tortured beasts, a noise so profound it seemed to silence the very wind. This was not an invasion, it was an unmaking, a force of nature so absolute that the divine order itself began to fray at the edges. High atop their celestial home, the Olympian gods witnessed the approach of this horror. These were beings of immense power, veterans of the Titan War, who had faced down giants and primordial terrors. Yet as they watched Typhon's ascent, a fear unlike any they had ever known seized them. This was not the strategic dread of a battle that might be lost. This was the primal, instinctual terror of annihilation, of being erased from existence by something that should not be. The courage that had defined them evaporated in an instant, replaced by a panic so pure and overwhelming that it overrode their very divinity. In a desperate, almost pathetic act of self-preservation, they surrendered their glorious forms. The mighty pantheon, the symbols of power and beauty, abandoned their posts. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, became a fish and dove into the deepest river. Apollo, the radiant sun god, transformed into a hawk and fled for the horizon. Ares, the god of war himself, shifted into a boar and charged away in mindless fear. Artemis became a cat, Dionysus a goat, and Hermes, the swift messenger, hid his identity under the guise of an ibis. One by one, they shed their divine majesty, choosing the forms of simple creatures to hide from a predator they could not possibly defeat. Their collective flight took them all the way to Egypt, where they cowered, hoping the ancient sands would conceal their shame. This moment stands as one of the most startling and humanizing in all of mythology, revealing that even the gods are not immune to sheer, undiluted terror. This mass exodus serves a profound purpose in the myth. It wasn't just a display of cowardice, it was a narrative device to emphasize the absolute uniqueness of the threat. The Titans were a rival dynasty, a faction to be overthrown. Typhon was something else entirely, a force of nature that did not seek to rule the cosmos but to dissolve it back into its primordial components. The god's flight underscores that this was not a political conflict but an existential one. They weren't just risking their thrones, they were facing the end of reality itself. Only two figures remained steadfast on Olympus. Athena, the goddess of strategic warfare and wisdom, stood her ground, her face a mask of grim resolve. She did not flee because her very nature is opposed to mindless panic. She represents the cool, calculated courage needed to face impossible odds, and beside her stood Zeus, the king. His decision to stay was not born of a lack of fear, but of a supreme understanding of his role. He was the linchpin of creation, the anchor of order. For him, flight was not an option because there was nowhere to run from a threat that was the universe itself turning inward to consume him. The stage was now set for a confrontation with no witnesses, no armies, and no rules, a raw, primal duel between the embodiment of order and the personification of chaos. While the rest of the pantheon scattered to the winds in a blind panic, two luminous figures remained, their resolve a stark beacon against the encroaching darkness. For Zeus, this was the moment of ultimate truth. He was not just a king defending his throne, he was the living embodiment of cosmic order, the very principle of a structured universe facing its absolute opposite. To flee would be to annihilate the concept of his own existence. His daughter Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, stood beside him, not as a fellow combatant in the coming physical fray, but as the personification of the calculated courage and clear-minded strategy he would need to survive. Where the other gods acted on pure instinct, Athena's presence represented the enduring power of reason, even in the face of overwhelming terror. This solitary stand defines Zeus's character in a way his victory over the Titans never could. That was a war of rebellion, of a younger generation fighting for their rightful place. This was different. This was about stewardship. As king, his duty was not to his own power, but to the preservation of the world he now ruled. He was the final, unbreakable line between creation and the void. This profound sense of responsibility steeled his nerves, transforming his initial shock into a cold, focused wrath. He would not run because there was simply nowhere to run to. The entire cosmos was his to protect, and if it fell, he would fall with it. He began his preparations, calling upon the very tools that had secured his reign. From the deepest forges of the divine smiths, the Cyclopes, he summoned his ultimate weapons, the masterfully crafted thunderbolts. These were not mere bolts of lightning. They were concentrated, solid shafts of pure cosmic energy, crackling with the power of storms, justice, and absolute authority. To wield one was to hold the raw, untamable force of the sky itself. In his other hand, he raised the aegis, a formidable shield often associated with Athena but forged in the fires of primordial power. More than just a defense, the aegis was a symbol of divine protection, fringed with terrifying tassels and bearing the head of the Gorgon Medusa, a weapon capable of striking fear into the heart of any foe, even one as monstrous as Typhon. Arming himself was both a physical and a psychological ritual. Each piece of equipment was a reminder of what he fought for and who he was. The thunderbolts represented his offensive might, the power to strike down chaos. The aegis represented his defensive duty, his role as the shield of civilization and the natural world. As he stood there, the last bastion of Olympus, he wasn't just a god gearing up for a fight. He was the concept of order itself making its final, unwavering stand. The fate of every god, every mortal, every star in the sky now rested on his shoulders and his alone. The air grew still and heavy, charged with the immense power he was gathering, a silent counterpoint to the world-shattering cacophony of the approaching monster. The greatest battle in all of mythology was seconds from beginning. With the might of the cosmos gathered in his hands, Zeus made the first move. From his celestial vantage point, he reared back and hurled a thunderbolt of such immense power that it tore the very fabric of the sky. A searing, white-hot spear of pure energy lanced downward, striking one of Typhon's central heads with the force of a star's birth. The impact was cataclysmic, exploding the serpentine skull into a shower of ash and fire, and a roar of pain and fury echoed across the world, a sound that blended the scream of a hurricane with the shriek of a dying dragon. Encouraged, Zeus unleashed his divine arsenal, becoming a storm himself. One after another, his thunderbolts rained down, a relentless barrage of cosmic justice that lit the battlefield in a constant, terrifying strobe. Each strike found its mark, scorching scales, shearing wings, and turning monstrous heads into momentary torches. Yet, for every head Zeus destroyed, the seething mass of necks seemed to writhe and produce another. Typhon's regenerative power was as terrifying as his initial strength. He was not a creature that could be simply overpowered. He was a force of nature, and you cannot permanently destroy a hurricane by striking its winds. Enraged beyond measure, the monster retaliated with the very earth itself. Wrenching his colossal limbs free from the ground, he tore two entire mountains from their foundations, Mount Athos in the north and the volcanic Mount Etna in the south. With a heave that made the planet groan in protest, he hurled them at the sky god. The sight was one of impossible scale, great peaks of stone and soil, homes to nymphs and mortals, launched like throwing stones to crush the lord of the sky. Zeus, swift as thought, dodged and weaved through the air, the mountains whistling past him to crash into the sea, forever altering the geography of the world. But the assault did not stop there. From his 100 throats, Typhon unleashed a firestorm. This was not ordinary flame. It was primordial fire, the same chaotic blaze that existed before the sun was set in its chariot. Great gouts of incandescent plasma, mixed with superheated rock and toxic fumes, roared upward, creating a hellish inferno that reached for the heavens. The sky, Zeus's own domain, became a deadly furnace of rock and flame. The air itself grew thick and foul, choking and blinding the god-king. This was Typhon's strategy, to use the world as his weapon and turn the ordered cosmos into a chaotic battlefield where even a god could not survive. In that terrifying moment, the stalemate became painfully clear. Zeus's unmatched offensive power, while devastating, was not enough for a decisive victory. He could wound the beast, but he could not put it down. Conversely, Typhon's raw, earth-shattering fury could not easily strike a foe as swift and strategic as the sky god. This was no longer a simple contest of strength. It had become a deadly game of tactical adaptation. The initial exchange proved that brute force alone was a path to mutual destruction. Victory would require something more. It would demand cunning, leverage, and a willingness to embrace a vulnerability that could be turned into the ultimate strength. The king of the gods, hovering in the smoke-choked air, realized he would have to close the distance and face the monster on its own terms, risking everything in a final, desperate grapple. Seeing that his raw, earth-shaking power could not immediately crush the agile sky god, Typhon's countless minds shifted to a terrifyingly clever strategy. He was not merely a rampaging beast, he was a primordial intellect, a being of ancient cunning. As Zeus maneuvered for another aerial assault, Typhon created an opening, feigning a deeper injury from the thunderbolts than he had truly sustained. He allowed a portion of his writhing form to crash to the ground, shaking the earth with a convincing shudder of defeat. For a fleeting moment, it appeared the king's relentless onslaught had finally broken the monster's advance. This was the deception. As Zeus descended, thunderbolts still crackling in his hands, confident he was about to deliver the final blow, Typhon struck with the speed of a viper. From the seeming chaos of his fallen limbs, one massive arm lashed out, but it was not aiming to crush or bludgeon. Clutched in its grasp was a weapon forged in the absolute darkness of Tartarus itself, a sickle made of adamant, an indestructible, razor-edged metal that predated the gods. This was no ordinary blade. It was a symbol of a bygone era, the very same material that Cronus had used to overthrow his father, Ouronos. In that instant, Typhon was not just attacking Zeus, he was replaying the very act of divine castration that had set this cycle of vengeance in motion. The move was horrifyingly precise. The adamant sickle flashed, and with a series of sickening cuts, Typhon severed the divine sinews from Zeus's hands and feet. In Greek mythology, these were not just tendons, they were the literal conduits of a god's power, the fibers that channeled divine strength and will into action. To sever them was to unplug a god from the source of their own might. The thunderbolts, moments ago symbols of ultimate power, flickered and died in Zeus's now limp hands. The king of Olympus, the master of the sky, was utterly paralyzed, rendered a prisoner within his own immortal body. He was conscious, aware, and filled with a rage he was powerless to act upon, completely at the mercy of his greatest enemy. The humiliation that followed was even more profound than the physical mutilation. Typhon, in a display of cruel triumph, hoisted the immobilized form of the most powerful being in the universe onto his shoulders. He then began a long, deliberate march back to the very place of his own birth, the dark, suffocating Corycian cave in Cilicia. This was a calculated act of symbolic reversal. He was dragging order back into the womb of chaos, returning the king of the gods to the dank, primordial darkness from which he had sought to free the cosmos. Inside the cave, Typhon dumped Zeus's helpless body onto the cold stone floor, a trophy of his unimaginable victory. But the monster's cunning did not end there. He knew the sinews were the key. Simply leaving them attached to a paralyzed Zeus was a risk. They could potentially regenerate or be reattached by some other divine intervention. So he hid them. He placed the gleaming, powerful cords inside a bearskin, a rough, bestial pouch, and set a formidable guardian over them, the she-dragon Delphyne. Often described as half-maiden, half-serpent, Delphyne was herself an ancient and powerful dracana, a creature of the deep earth perfectly suited to this grim task. She was more than a simple watchdog. She was a sentinel of the abyss, coiled around the bearskin, her eyes gleaming in the cave's darkness, ensuring that the source of Zeus's power would remain forever lost in the deepest dark. This moment represents the absolute nadir of Zeus's reign, a catastrophe so complete it is almost impossible to overstate. The cosmos had a new, monstrous ruler. The gods were scattered and hiding in animal forms. The king was imprisoned, mutilated, and stripped of the very essence of his divinity, guarded in the heart of his enemy's lair. The universe, so carefully ordered, hung by a thread, teetering on the brink of collapsing back into the formless, silent void from which it had sprung. All hope, it seemed, was extinguished. Yet even in this moment of absolute despair, a flicker of hope remained, born not from raw power but from cunning and courage. While the mighty Ares had fled as a boar and Apollo as a hawk, two other deities had chosen a different path. Hermes, the swift messenger and patron of tricksters, and Pan, the rustic god of the wild, had not fled all the way to Egypt. They had instead taken refuge in the rugged, forested slopes near the Corycian cave itself, hiding not out of pure terror, but with a watchful, strategic patience. They understood that against a foe like Typhon, strength had already failed. The only path to victory now lay in cleverness and stealth. From their concealed vantage point, they had witnessed the horrifying procession of Typhon carrying the paralyzed Zeus into the cave's gaping maw. They saw the she-dragon Delphyne take her post as guardian, where others saw an insurmountable problem. Hermes, with his quick and devious mind, saw a series of moving parts that could be manipulated. He formulated a plan that was audacious in its simplicity and immense in its risk. They would not storm the cave, they would infiltrate it. They would not fight the guardian, they would outwit her. Their goal was not to kill Typhon, but to perform a divine heist, to steal back the very essence of Zeus's power from under the monster's nose. Under the cover of the perpetual twilight cast by Typhon's presence, the two gods moved like whispers. Hermes, in his element as the master of thieves and boundaries, led the way, his footsteps making no sound on the ancient stone. Pan followed, his goat-like form surprisingly agile and silent in the oppressive darkness. The air inside the cave was thick with the smell of damp earth, serpentine musk, and primordial dread. There, in the heart of the cavern, coiled around the precious bearskin pouch, was Delphyne. Her half-maiden, half-serpent form was alert, her eyes like glowing coals scanning the shadows, a low, continuous hiss emanating from her throat. The plan unfolded with perfect synergy. Hermes, employing every ounce of his legendary guile, created a distraction. Perhaps he cast a whispering illusion, the sound of skittering pebbles from a far-off tunnel. Maybe he subtly altered the light, creating a faint, shimmering mirage that drew the dragon's gaze away from her precious charge. It was a masterclass in misdirection, a sleight of hand performed on a cosmic scale. For a critical few seconds, Delphine's unwavering attention was broken. That was all the opportunity Pan needed. The god of the wild, often seen as a simple pastoral figure, possessed a weapon far more potent than any sword: his voice. He drew in a breath and unleashed a cry unlike any other sound in the universe. This was not a mere shout, it was the panic. It was the raw, instinctual terror that grips soldiers before a battle, the mindless fear that floods through animals before a forest fire, the sheer, paralyzing dread that echoes in the deepest, most primal parts of the psyche. The sound was so sudden, so utterly horrifying and alien, that it bypassed all reason and struck directly at the core of Delphine's being. The she-dragon, a creature of ancient power, was for one moment not a formidable sentinel but a terrified animal. She recoiled, startled and confused by the overwhelming wave of primal fear that crashed over her. In that fleeting window of chaos, Hermes moved with speed that defied perception. He darted forward, his hands a blur, and snatched the bearskin pouch containing the divine sinews. The mission was accomplished. Without a moment to lose, the two gods retreated from the cave as swiftly and silently as they had entered, leaving a bewildered Delphyne in their wake. They raced to where Zeus's immobilized body lay, and with deft, careful hands, they worked to reattach the shimmering cords of power to his limbs. As the last sinew was restored, a tremendous surge of energy flooded back into the king of the gods. The paralysis shattered. His eyes, once filled with helpless rage, now blazed with renewed thunderous power. He rose to his feet, whole once more, his fists crackling with a fury that was about to be unleashed. The tide of the war had just turned on a moment of brilliant deception and raw, primal terror. Revitalized and seething with a cold, focused rage, Zeus erupted from the confines of the Corycian cave. This was no longer the confident king who had begun the fight. This was a deity fundamentally transformed by the humiliation of his mutilation and imprisonment. The power flowing through his reconnected sinews coursed with a new, terrifying intensity, a mixture of raw divine energy and pure, unadulterated vengeance. He would not just defeat Typhon, he would annihilate him, erasing every trace of the monster's existence from the cosmos he had sought to claim. With a thunderous command that shook the heavens, he summoned his golden chariot, a vehicle of war that blazed with the light of 1,000 suns. It descended from the smoke-choked sky, drawn by 4 magnificent immortal horses whose hooves struck sparks from the very air. Zeus mounted the chariot, taking the reins in one hand and clutching a freshly forged thunderbolt in the other. As the chariot ascended, it carved a path of brilliant light through the artificial night Typhon's wings had created, a defiant beacon announcing the true king's return. The second phase of the battle was not a continuation. It was an escalation into absolute apocalyptic warfare. Zeus, now a master of both sky and strategy, understood that a scattered barrage was ineffective against a foe of such immense and regenerative size. His previous attacks had been powerful but broad, like a storm lashing a coastline. Now his approach was surgical, precise, and utterly relentless. He became a divine artillery battery, hovering at a strategic height and unleashing a continuous, concentrated salvo of lightning bolts. Each crackling spear of energy was no longer thrown in anger but aimed with chilling calculation, targeting the joints between scales, the base of the writhing necks, the leathery membranes of the vast wings. Typhon, momentarily stunned by the sudden and complete restoration of his foe's power, roared in a confused fury. He responded with his own arsenal, hurling mountains and spewing gouts of primordial fire, but the tactical landscape had shifted. Zeus, guided by the wisdom of his near defeat and the cunning of his rescuers, was no longer a stationary target. His divine chariot gave him unmatched mobility, allowing him to wheel and dive through the torrent of rock and flame, avoiding the heaviest blows while his own offensive never ceased. The sound was no longer a duel of separate impacts but a single, continuous, world-shattering roar, the scream of the monster meeting the unending crackle of divine retribution. This was Zeus fighting not for his throne but for the very principle of order, and his wrath was a force as primordial as the chaos he sought to destroy. But brute force alone, even divine force, was proving insufficient to end this cataclysm. Zeus, the master strategist, understood this. A new plan began to form in his mind, a gambit that would use Typhon's own immense rage and power against him. He needed to channel the monster's chaotic energy to guide its destructive path toward a specific, catastrophic conclusion. With a feint, Zeus broke away from the direct assault, turning his chariot and racing westward across the sky, not in retreat, but as a hunter leading his prey to a chosen battleground. He was heading for the island of Sicily, a land of rugged terrain and, crucially, the volcanic peak of Mount Etna. Typhon, enraged and believing his foe was finally fleeing, gave thunderous pursuit. His colossal form tore across the landscape, his serpentine legs carving new valleys and his breath-setting forests ablaze as he chased the gleaming chariot across the sea. This was the culmination of Zeus's cunning. He was not running away, he was setting a trap on a continental scale. As he soared over Sicily, he slowed, allowing the gap between them to close. Typhon, sensing victory, reared up, his 100 heads screaming in triumphant fury, ready to finally grasp the sky god and finish what he had started in the cave. In that exact moment, at the apex of the monster's overconfident lunge, Zeus made his move. He called upon every last ounce of power granted by his restored sinews, drawing not just on the storm, but on the very tectonic forces of the planet itself. With a heave that strained the fabric of reality, he did not merely throw a thunderbolt. He reached down and wrenched the entire, immense volcanic mass of Mount Etna from its very foundations. The sight was one of ultimate divine power. A mountain, vast and smoking, was lifted into the sky as if it were a mere stone, and with unerring aim, Zeus hurled it downward, not at Typhon, but directly onto him. The impact was apocalyptic. The entire weight of the volcano crashed down upon the monstrous form, pinning Typhon to the earth with a force that shattered the bedrock beneath him. The countless heads were crushed, the serpentine limbs trapped, the fiery breath stifled under unimaginable tons of rock and earth. This was the masterstroke. Zeus had not just defeated his enemy, he had used the earth, the domain of Gaia herself, to permanently imprison her most destructive son. The very element that had given Typhon birth became his eternal cage. And thus the titanic struggle concluded not with a whimper, but with the seismic crash of a mountain finding a new and terrible purpose. And so the mountain fell, and with its crushing weight, the war was finally over. Yet for a being as primordial as Typhon, death was not an option. You cannot kill a hurricane, you can only hope to contain its fury. True annihilation was beyond even Zeus's power, for Typhon was not a mere creature but a fundamental force of the universe, chaos given tangible form. To destroy him utterly would be to unravel a part of creation itself. Instead, the king of the gods enacted a punishment that was both eternal and poetically just. The immense volcanic mass of Mount Etna became more than a weapon. It was transformed into a divine prison, its unimaginable weight serving as the lid on a cage designed to last for all time. Pinned beneath the mountain's roots, buried in the darkness of the deepest caverns, Typhon was condemned to an existence of endless, futile struggle. This was a fate far worse than death. The myths tell us that his imprisonment did not bring him peace or acceptance, but instead fueled an endless, simmering rage. Trapped within the very earth that had given him birth, his divine power had no outlet, no release. His 100 mouths still breathed fire, but now that infernal heat had nowhere to go, simmering and boiling within the mountain's core. His anguished roars of frustration and pain could not escape into the open air. They were absorbed by the rock, translated into deep, unsettling tremors. His colossal limbs, those same viper coils that had once shaken continents, still thrash and strain against their stone bonds, and every convulsive effort sends shockwaves through the land. In this brilliant piece of mythological storytelling, the ancient Greeks provided a powerful and terrifying explanation for the violent geology of their world. The eruptions of Mount Etna, with its spectacular lava flows and plumes of ash, were not random acts of nature. They were the visible, fiery breath of the monster beneath. The earthquakes that rattled the island of Sicily were not the shifting of impersonal tectonic plates. They were the literal rumblings of Typhon's eternal, frustrated struggle to break free. This idea transforms the landscape from a passive setting into an active character in the story, a permanent monument to the gods' greatest victory and a constant reminder of the terrifying power they subdued. Every time the ground shakes or the volcano lights up the night sky, it is an echo of that primordial battle, a signal that the forces of chaos are never truly vanquished, only restrained. Typhon became a part of the world's very geology, his essence woven into the fabric of the planet. This connection between myth and the physical world created a powerful and enduring link for the people who lived in the shadow of the volcano. For them, the myth was not just a story from a forgotten age. It was a living, breathing, and often frightening reality. It gave a name, a face, and a reason to the terrifying and unpredictable power of nature, making the incomprehensible feel tragically, heroically personal. Meanwhile, the echo of that final, cataclysmic crash rolled across the world, a deep and resonant signal that the storm had finally passed. In the sudden, unfamiliar silence that followed, the other Olympian gods, still hiding in their animal forms within the sands of Egypt, slowly began to comprehend what had happened. The oppressive dread that had driven them to flee began to lift, replaced not by triumph, but by a creeping, profound embarrassment. Their transformation back into divine forms was not a glorious spectacle, but a quiet, shamefaced process. The hawk that was Apollo molted back into the sun god, his radiance seeming dimmer than before. The fish that was Aphrodite shimmered back into the goddess of love, her beauty tinged with the blush of humiliation. Each god and goddess returned to their own shape, avoiding each other's eyes, collectively burdened by the memory of their own panic. They had not just fled a battle, they had abandoned their king, their family, and their sworn duty to protect the cosmos in its most desperate hour. Their journey back to Olympus was not a victorious parade, but a somber, silent trek. The home they returned to was scarred and battered, a testament to the battle they had not stayed to fight. And there stood Zeus, not waiting to greet them with open arms, but to pass a silent, unspoken judgment. He was different. The experience of mutilation, imprisonment, and ultimate victory had forged something new in him. His power, always immense, now carried the weight of absolute authority, seasoned by the knowledge that he had stood alone when it mattered most. He did not need to bellow accusations or mete out punishments. The simple, undeniable fact of their absence and his solitary victory was a condemnation more powerful than any thunderbolt. In that moment, the hierarchical structure of Olympus was permanently and irrevocably cemented. Zeus was no longer just first among equals, the clever brother who had won the draw for the sky. He was the sole, unquestioned master of the cosmos. His rule was now rooted not just in victory over the Titans, but in a personal, hard-won triumph over the greatest threat the universe would ever know. This event served as the final, definitive lesson on the nature of power in the New World Order. It proved that raw strength, like that of the Titans or even Typhon himself, was ultimately a blunt instrument. True, lasting supremacy belonged to the combination of that strength with unbreakable resolve, strategic intelligence, and the courage to face annihilation without flinching. Zeus had displayed all of these while the other gods had succumbed to base instinct. Their shame was the price of this lesson, a permanent reminder of their failure that would govern their behavior for all eternity. It ensured their loyalty not through love or camaraderie, but through a humbling awareness of their own limitations and the supreme capability of their king. Furthermore, the crushing of Typhon sent a chilling message reverberating back through the ancient, shadowy corners of creation, a warning to any other primordial forces that might still slumber in the deep earth or the void of chaos. Gaia herself, the architect of this rebellion, was ultimately silenced. Her greatest weapon had been not merely defeated, but made a permanent part of the ordered world. His rage harnessed to power a volcano under the watchful eye of the gods. The message was clear: the age of the primordials was over. The Olympian order was not a temporary arrangement, but the permanent state of the universe. Any challenge to it would be met with absolute, devastating force, and the would-be challenger would become not a martyr, but a feature of the landscape, a story to frighten future generations. The cosmos had found its anchor, and his name was Zeus. Beyond the spectacle of clashing titans and world-shattering force, this myth serves as the foundational story for the entire Greek understanding of the universe. It is far more than a simple tale of good versus evil. It is a profound allegory for the most fundamental conflict imaginable, the struggle between cosmos and chaos. The ancient Greeks saw their world as a precarious achievement. A delicate order wrestled from a universe that was inherently wild and unpredictable. In this grand symbolic narrative, Zeus and Typhon are not just characters, they are living embodiments of these two opposing cosmic principles. Zeus, as the king of the Olympians, personifies the concept of cosmos, a word that means not just the universe but an ordered system, a harmonious arrangement governed by laws, reason, and structure. His domain is the bright, clear sky, a place of light, foresight, and divine authority. He represents the ideals of civilization, justice, oaths, hospitality, and the rule of law. His victory over the Titans was the first step in imposing this order, but Typhon represented a far more ancient and fundamental threat. Where the Titans were a rival dynasty, Typhon was the antithesis of the very idea of a dynasty. He is chaos in its purest form, the uncontrollable fury of a hurricane, the mindless destruction of an earthquake, the raw, untamed power of the wild earth that exists without reason or purpose. His home is not another realm but the dark, primal depths below, the chthonic world that exists before and beyond civilization's reach. Their battle, therefore, is the ultimate showdown between these two states of existence. Every thunderbolt Zeus hurls is not merely an attack but an assertion of logical structure against meaningless bedlam. Every mountain Typhon throws is a manifestation of the natural world's indifference to the projects of gods and men. The flight of the other Olympians is a powerful symbol of how fragile civilization can be when faced with pure, unadulterated chaos. Even the gods, in that moment of primal terror, reverted to a baser, animal state, their divine reason overthrown by instinctual fear. Zeus's ultimate victory, achieved through a combination of raw power, strategic cunning, and crucial assistance, carries immense symbolic weight. It signifies that order is not the natural state of the universe, but a hard-won and constantly defended achievement. The stability of the world, the predictable turning of the seasons, the safety of cities, these are not given. They are maintained through continual effort against a backdrop of inherent chaos. By imprisoning Typhon beneath Mount Etna rather than destroying him, the myth acknowledges that chaos can never be truly eliminated. It is a permanent, simmering part of the world. Its rumblings and fiery eruptions a constant reminder of the thin crust of order separating civilization from the abyss. This story provided the ancient Greeks with a framework to understand their often volatile and dangerous world, explaining natural disasters not as random acts but as the visible struggle between the cosmic forces of order and chaos, a struggle their own civilization was built upon. This powerful connection between myth and landscape wasn't just a creative flourish. It was a fundamental way for the ancient Greeks to navigate a world filled with terrors they couldn't otherwise explain. The colonists who settled the shores of Sicily and Magna Graecia, what we now call southern Italy, found themselves in a land of breathtaking beauty and unimaginable violence. The ground beneath their feet would tremble without warning, and the majestic peak of Mount Etna would frequently light up the night sky with rivers of fire and spew clouds of choking ash that blotted out the sun. These weren't abstract geological events to them. They were the actions of a conscious, malevolent force. The myth of Typhon's imprisonment gave them a framework to understand this terrifying power. It transformed the random, senseless destruction of a volcanic eruption into a narrative with a clear cause and effect. That deep, guttural rumble wasn't just subterranean activity. It was the anguished roar of the father of all monsters straining against his mountainous chains. The lava flows weren't merely molten rock. They were the fiery, toxic breath from his 100 screaming mouths, finally finding a crack in his prison to escape into the world above. This act of personification is a profound psychological tool, a method for the human mind to process the uncontrollable. By giving a name and a story to the volcano, the people living in its shadow could move from a state of pure, helpless terror to one of comprehension, however mythical. They could point to the mountain and say, "That is Typhon." This knowledge, in a strange way, made the danger feel manageable. It was no longer an impersonal, random act of nature. It was the action of a specific, known entity with a history and a reason for his rage. This story became woven into the very fabric of their daily lives and culture. Parents would tell their children about the monster under the mountain to explain why the earth shook. and priests would make offerings to Zeus and the gods, not to stop the eruptions, but to plead for their continued strength in keeping the Titan in prison. The myth provided a form of comfort, a way to live alongside the sublime and destructive power of nature by embedding it within their cosmology. Furthermore, the geographical specificity of the myth anchored it in reality, making the divine drama feel immediate and tangible. For a Greek sailor traveling along the coast of Sicily, the sight of Mount Etna smoking on the horizon was a direct visual confirmation of their most sacred stories. They weren't just looking at a mountain, they were looking at the proof of Zeus's ultimate victory and the ongoing prison of his greatest foe. This created a powerful link between the abstract world of the gods and the physical world of human experience. The landscape itself became a sacred text, a map of divine history written in rock and fire. Other geographical features in the region were also absorbed into the mythos. The volcanic Aeolian Islands, for instance, were sometimes said to be the rocks hurled by Typhon during the battle, now permanently settled into the sea. Every earthquake and eruption reinforced the myth's validity, creating a continuous feedback loop where natural events validated the story, and the story, in turn, gave meaning to the events. This wasn't a primitive misunderstanding of science. It was a sophisticated cultural system for making sense of a volatile world, turning a terrifying geological reality into a foundational part of their identity and their understanding of the cosmos. While Hesiod's epic account provides the most visceral and well-known version of this cosmic struggle, it is far from the only one. The ancient Greek world was not a monolith with a single, unchanging set of stories. It was a vibrant tapestry of city-states and colonies, each with its own local traditions and favorite poets. As the myth of Zeus and Typhon traveled across this landscape, it was adapted, refined, and sometimes completely reimagined to suit different audiences and purposes. These variations are not simple errors or contradictions. They are a fascinating testament to the living, evolving nature of mythology itself. One of the most significant alternate accounts comes from the later Greek mythographer Apollodorus, who compiled many of these traditions in his work, the Library. In his version, the core elements remain Gaia's vengeance, the god's flight, the theft of the sinews, but the final confrontation is dramatically different. There is no prolonged aerial duel, no strategic chase across the sea, and no grand finale with a mountain. Instead, the moment Hermes and Pan restore Zeus's power, the conflict is resolved with breathtaking swiftness. Zeus, now whole and filled with a fury born of his humiliation, immediately mounts his chariot, pursues Typhon, and blasts him into submission with a single, overwhelming volley of thunderbolts. This version streamlines the story into a more direct moral lesson, the absolute and unchallengeable supremacy of Zeus. It emphasizes that once the king of the gods is restored to his full might, no force in the universe, no matter how terrifying, can stand against him for even a moment. It's a narrative choice that prioritizes divine authority above epic spectacle. Other poets stretch the battle to even more incredible lengths and scales. Some accounts describe the conflict not as a single engagement, but as a worldwide war that raged from the mountains of Thrace to the deserts of Egypt. In these expansive versions, the two combatants are portrayed as nearly equal forces of nature, with the outcome hanging in the balance for days or even weeks. The geography of the known world becomes a canvas for their violence, with every new mountain range or strange rock formation explained as a scar from their titanic struggle. This approach transforms the myth from a story about two beings into a story about the shaping of the world itself, connecting the divine drama directly to the landscape its audience inhabited. It suggests that the very map of their world was authored in the fiery clash between order and chaos. These regional variations offer a captivating glimpse into how ancient communities used myth to explain their own local realities. For the people living in the shadow of Mount Etna, Hesiod's version, with its dramatic volcanic imprisonment, was the most meaningful and terrifyingly real. But for a Greek living in Anatolia or North Africa, a version that featured Typhon's flight through their own homeland would have resonated more deeply, rooting global myths in local soil. The different endings also reflect varying cultural attitudes toward power and authority. A version where Zeus wins instantly underscores a belief in a stable, unshakable cosmic order. A version where the battle is long and arduous, however, might reflect a worldview that sees the struggle between order and chaos as a constant, ongoing effort, a theme that would have felt very real to people living in politically turbulent times. By exploring these variations, we don't devalue the myth. We enrich our understanding of the ancient Greek mind, revealing a culture that constantly debated, reinterpreted, and found new meaning in its most foundational stories. Perhaps the most remarkable testament to Typhon's enduring impact is not found in a dusty scroll or a volcanic crater, but in the very words we use to describe the weather. The ancient Greeks, living in a world where myth and reality were woven from the same cloth, made a powerful linguistic connection. They observed the terrifying, violent storms that would occasionally lash the Mediterranean Sea, storms of such ferocious power that they seemed to tear the world apart. To them, this was not mere meteorology, it was the lingering essence of a specific divine terror. They saw in these whirlwinds and tempests the chaotic, untamable spirit of Typhon himself, and so they named these phenomena after him, Typhon Tau Upsilon Phi Omega Nu. This was not a casual nickname, but a profound identification. The storm was the monster, his rage made manifest in wind and wave long after his body was imprisoned. This powerful term did not remain static. It began an incredible journey across cultures and languages, carried by traders and storytellers. It was adopted into Arabic as letter 1 E60 Umakron F Macron N, a word used for a great flood or a devastating storm. From there, it traveled further, influenced by the Persian language and eventually making its way into the vocabularies of Europe. The word transformed, blending with other linguistic influences, including a Chinese root word Typhon, meaning great wind, and ultimately crystallized in English as the word we know today, typhoon. So, every single time a meteorologist warns of an approaching typhoon in the Pacific, or we read news reports of these immense tropical cyclones unleashing their catastrophic power, we are unknowingly participating in a tradition that stretches back millennia. We are uttering the name of the father of all monsters. That modern, scientific term for a complex atmospheric event is in its heart a direct echo of an ancient scream of primal chaos. It is a stunning example of how mythology embeds itself into the foundation of our language, connecting our contemporary understanding of the world to the deepest, most archetypal fears and stories of our ancestors. The myth lives on, not just as a tale, but on the lips of everyone who speaks of the storm's unparalleled fury. This legendary confrontation was far too momentous to be confined to the scrolls of poets. It demanded to be seen. For the ancient Greeks, the battle between Zeus and Typhon was not just a story to be heard, but a spectacle to be witnessed, and they turned to the canvas of their everyday lives to portray it pottery. Across countless red figure and black figure vases, artists captured the essence of the duel, providing a visual scripture for a largely illiterate society. In these depictions, we rarely see the full, overwhelming horror of Typhon as described by Hesiod. The medium's constraints favored a more symbolic approach. Typically, Typhon is rendered as a giant, often bearded with powerful human-like legs, but from his waist erupts a coiling mass of serpentine bodies. The artist's focus was on the decisive moment, a dynamic, powerful Zeus, muscles taut, striding purposefully forward, his body a model of divine athleticism. His arm is invariably drawn back, poised to unleash a thunderbolt that looks less like a lightning strike and more like a glowing, stylized javelin of pure power, aimed directly at the monstrous foe. These scenes are not chaotic, they are compositions of ordered triumph, designed to reinforce the message that the forces of Olympus, embodied by their king, would always prevail against the untamed chaos of the earth. Centuries later, as the Renaissance rediscovered classical mythology and the Baroque period embraced its drama, artists revisited this epic with a whole new toolkit of emotion, movement, and sheer theatrical scale. Liberated from the curved surface of a vase, painters could now unleash the full, horrifying potential of the myth onto vast canvases and cathedral ceilings. The focus shifted from symbolic victory to overwhelming sensory experience. In these works, Typhon is finally realized in all his apocalyptic glory. We see him not as a man with snake legs, but as a swirling vortex of monstrous heads, leathery wings that blot out the sun, and a tempest of limbs, both human and reptilian. The setting is no longer a neutral space, but a fractured landscape of smoking ruins and tempestuous skies, reflecting the cosmic stakes of the battle. Artists like Giulio Romano and later Peter Paul Rubens mastered the depiction of raw, violent energy. Their Zeus is no longer a calm, stoic figure, but a dynamic, muscular force of nature himself, often shown straining every sinew as he hurls his lightning. The compositions are diagonal, unstable, and filled with a violent motion that pulls the viewer's eye across the chaos. The use of intense chiaroscuro, the stark contrast between light and shadow, becomes a narrative device in itself. Zeus and his thunderbolts are often the source of a brilliant, divine light that cuts through the oppressive darkness of Typhon's form, symbolically portraying the very theme of order-piercing chaos. These paintings were designed to evoke awe and even terror in the viewer, to make them feel the reverberations of the clash and the immense power required to secure the stable world they lived in. This artistic journey, from the elegant lines on a Greek pot to the overwhelming drama of a Baroque fresco, has fundamentally shaped our modern visual imagination of this and other myths. When we picture Zeus, we likely see the powerful, bearded patriarch from these later paintings. When we imagine a titanic battle, we think of those swirling, dark canvases filled with conflict. These artworks were the original special effects blockbusters, translating epic poetry into a universal language of color, form, and emotion. They ensured that the story of Zeus and Typhon was not just read, but felt and remembered, passed down through generations not only by storytellers, but by the enduring power of art. This ancient struggle between the divine king and the primordial monster has proven to be an endlessly renewable source of inspiration, its core themes resonating just as powerfully in our modern myth-making as they did for the ancient Greeks. The archetype of Typhon, the ultimate world-ending threat that can only be overcome by a combination of supreme power and clever strategy, has found a perfect home in the interactive worlds of video games. In the critically acclaimed title Hades, developed by Supergiant Games, the player's journey is punctuated by epic encounters with legendary figures, and the presence of Typhon looms large. Though he may not appear directly in the base game, his legacy is felt through the monstrous children the player must battle, and the game's rich, elusive dialogue constantly references the Titanomachy and the Gigantomachy, positioning Typhon as the pinnacle of primordial threats that even the gods of the underworld fear. The game masterfully translates the myth's core theme into a gameplay loop where the hero, Zagreus, must repeatedly face overwhelming chaos, die, learn from each attempt, and return stronger, a direct echo of Zeus's own initial defeat and ultimate resurgence. This theme is even more explicit in the God of War franchise, where the scale of conflict is deliberately designed to feel mythic and insurmountable. While the earlier games pitted Krotos against the entire Greek pantheon, the specter of the giants and primordial beings like Typhon is always present. In fact, the God of War Roman III expansion Ascension features a multi-stage boss battle against the Hecatonchires, a 100-handed giant born from the same primordial bloodline as Typhon, establishing the kind of enemy that makes the gods themselves seem small. Game designers inherently understand that a truly memorable final boss cannot be a mere obstacle. It must feel like a force of nature, an event that tests everything the player has learned. Typhon's myth provides the perfect blueprint for this, a being of such immense scale and chaotic power that defeating it feels less like winning a fight and more like surviving a cataclysm. The player, like Zeus, must use every tool at their disposal: raw strength, acquired gear, environmental advantages, and quick-witted strategy to overcome a foe that represents pure, unthinking destruction. Beyond the digital realm, the comic book industry has long drawn from the deep well of mythology to create its own pantheon of villains and heroes, and Typhon's influence is unmistakable. He is the archetype for the world-breaker class of villain, characters whose power level is so astronomically high that their very existence threatens the stability of the universe. You can see his DNA in Marvel Comics characters like Galactus, the Devourer of Worlds, who is not so much evil as he is an elemental force of nature that the heroes must find a way to divert or survive. You see it in DC Comics' Darkseid, who is less a conventional villain and more the literal embodiment of tyrannical evil and anti-life, an unstoppable threat that often requires the entire Justice League and beyond to merely contain. These are not villains with simple motives. They are conceptual embodiments of chaos and destruction, much like Typhon was for the Greeks. Their stories are never about simple defeat. They are about finding a way to re-imprison the chaos, to push the existential threat back into its box for another day, mirroring Zeus's solution of entombing Typhon beneath Mount Etna rather than being able to truly destroy him. What makes this modern adaptation so compelling is its faithfulness to the spirit of the original myth. In every iteration, from the pixelated screen to the inked panel, Typhon and his conceptual descendants remain the ultimate challenge that separates a mere hero from a true legend. He is the final exam for godhood. The heroes who face him must demonstrate the same qualities Zeus did, not just unmatched power, but resilience in the face of utter defeat, the strategic mind to adapt when brute force fails, and the courage to confront a being that embodies annihilation itself. This enduring relevance proves that the ancient Greeks tapped into a fundamental narrative truth about the nature of conflict and resolution. We are still telling his story because we are still fascinated by the fragile line between order and chaos, and we still need stories that assure us that even the most terrifying chaos can be overcome with enough courage, cunning, and will. When we place this legendary battle alongside other great mythological conflicts, its unique character comes into sharp focus. The Titanomachy, the war that first established Zeus's rule, was a sprawling, decade-long clash of dynasties. It was a civil war among the divine, with armies of gods, titans, and cyclopes clashing in a structured, almost political struggle for the throne of the universe. The fight against Typhon was something entirely different. This was not a war, it was a primal, personal duel. It stripped away the armies and the politics, reducing the conflict to its most essential form: a single champion of order facing a single embodiment of chaos. This shift in scale makes the confrontation feel more intimate and, paradoxically, more epic. The fate of all creation didn't hang on the movement of armies, but on the outcome of a fistfight between two cosmic beings. This archetype of the solitary champion defending the world from a primordial monster resonates across global mythology, revealing a shared human fascination with this foundational struggle. In Norse legends, we see the mighty Thor, the god of thunder, destined to face the world serpent, Jormungandr, during the cataclysm of Ragnarok. This isn't a war for territory, but a final, apocalyptic duel between two sworn enemies, a battle so fierce that it is said they will kill each other. Similarly, in the ancient Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, the patron god Marduk does not fight a rival pantheon. He takes on the primordial goddess of the salt sea, Tiamat, a being of pure, watery chaos who represents the formless void that existed before creation. Marduk's victory is not just a military triumph, it is a creative act. He slays her and uses her divided body to form the heavens and the earth, imposing order on her chaos just as Zeus used a mountain to imprison Typhon's disruptive force. What truly sets the Zeus and Typhon narrative apart within this global tradition is its profound psychological depth and the humbling vulnerability it imposes on its hero. In many of these stories, the chief god enters the fight from a position of unchallenged strength. Marduk is portrayed as a young, vibrant god armed with the perfect weapons crafted for the occasion. Thor's entire identity is built around his boundless strength and eagerness for a brawl. Zeus's experience is markedly different. His story includes a moment of catastrophic, humiliating defeat. He is mutilated, stripped of his power, and imprisoned in a cave, a depth of despair not often seen in other chief gods' narratives. This vulnerability makes his ultimate victory far more meaningful. It's not a foregone conclusion born of inherent superiority. It's a hard-won comeback achieved through resilience, the help of allies, and strategic cunning. His triumph feels earned in a way that is deeply human, reminding us that even the highest authority can be brought low and must fight desperately to reclaim it. Furthermore, the aftermath of this battle carves out a unique legacy. Unlike Thor and Jormungandr, who mutually annihilate each other, or Marduk, who destroys Tiamat to create the world, Zeus finds a third way. He achieves a permanent victory without complete annihilation, opting instead for eternal imprisonment. This solution acknowledges that chaos can never be truly eradicated from the world. It can only be managed and contained. The rumbling of Mount Etna serves as a constant, tangible reminder of this ongoing struggle, making the myth feel immediate and real for the people who lived with it. This creates a more complex and enduring cosmology than a simple tale of good vanquishing evil. It presents a universe where order is a precarious, maintained state, forever bordering on a chaos that is never fully gone, only temporarily buried. This nuanced conclusion offers a powerful and timeless metaphor for the human condition itself, where our civilized lives are a constant effort to impose order on the chaotic forces both within and around us. This legendary confrontation, while a tale of gods and monsters, resonates so deeply precisely because it mirrors the most universal of human experiences, the internal battle for self-mastery. On a psychological level, the myth of Zeus and Typhon transforms into a powerful allegory for our own daily struggles. The king of Olympus, with his thunderbolts of decisive action and his aegis of rational thought, becomes a symbol of our conscious mind, our reason, our discipline, and our willpower. He is that part of us that sets goals, makes plans, and strives for order and structure in our lives. Conversely, Typhon embodies the terrifying, chaotic forces that reside within each of us. He is the personification of our raw, untamed emotions, the sudden, blinding rage that makes us say things we regret, the bottomless pit of anxiety that paralyzes us, the seething jealousy that poisons our relationships, or the impulsive desires that derail our best intentions. Like the monster born from the deepest pits of the earth, these impulses feel primordial, erupting from a place that seems older and more powerful than our rational mind. They are the internal storms that threaten to overthrow our carefully constructed sense of self. The initial failed assault by Zeus, where his thunderbolts are not enough, mirrors our own futile attempts to simply suppress or ignore these powerful feelings. We try to use sheer willpower to bully our anxiety into submission or to forcefully extinguish our anger, only to find that these emotions, like Typhon's heads, regenerate and come back stronger. The moment of Zeus's defeat, his sinews cut, his power stolen, is that devastating experience of being overwhelmed by our own inner chaos. It's the panic attack that shatters our composure, the fit of rage that ruins a friendship, or the wave of despair that makes us abandon our ambitions. In those moments, it feels like our very essence, our power to act, has been stolen and locked away by the monster within. but the myth doesn't end there, and neither must we. The rescue by Hermes and Pan offers a crucial insight. We cannot win this internal war alone. Hermes, the cunning trickster, represents our creativity and our ability to outsmart our own destructive patterns. He is the part of our psyche that can reframe a negative situation, find a clever workaround for a problem, or use humor to diffuse tension. Pan, with his terrifying cry, symbolizes the power of acknowledging and even channeling our primal nature. Sometimes, to overcome a powerful emotion, we must first fully feel it and release its energy in a controlled way, rather than trying to pretend it doesn't exist. Together, they show that overcoming our inner typhons requires a combination of clever strategy and a respectful acknowledgement of our own raw, primal energy. The final victory, the imprisonment beneath Mount Etna, is the ultimate goal of this psychological journey. It is not about killing our emotions. That would be both impossible and undesirable, as they are a vital part of who we are. Instead, it is about integration and management. We learn to recognize the rumble of our anger before it erupts, to feel the heat of our anxiety without letting it consume us. We build our own personal mountain of healthy coping mechanisms, self-awareness, and disciplined habits to contain these powerful forces. The goal is not to live a life without storms, but to become the steady mountain that can withstand them, using their energy without being destroyed by it. The myth, therefore, becomes a timeless promise that through reason, strategy, and self-compassion, we can imprison our own chaos and rule the ordered kingdom of our own lives. Yet in the grand retelling of this cosmic clash, one figure's contribution is too often relegated to a mere footnote, a presence acknowledged but its profound significance left unexplored. While the other Olympians scattered to the winds in a frenzy of animalistic panic, one deity remained, a pillar of unwavering resolve amidst the crumbling courage of the gods. Athena, the gray-eyed goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, did not flinch. She did not transform or flee. She stood firmly by her father's side, her expression not one of blind fury, but of cold, calculated focus. Her decision to stay was not an act of rebellion, but the ultimate expression of her divine nature. Where Ares embodies the chaotic, bloody frenzy of battle, Athena personifies its intelligent, disciplined heart, the general surveying the field, not the soldier lost in the melee. In that moment of absolute terror, she represented the one thing chaos cannot abide: clear, unshakable reason. Her presence on that battlefield was far more than symbolic loyalty. It was a strategic necessity. Think of Zeus as the raw, untamable power of a storm, incredibly destructive, but ultimately directionless without a purpose. Athena provided that purpose. She was the lightning rod that channeled that chaotic energy into a focused strike. While Zeus's power was the weapon, Athena's mind was the aiming mechanism. Ancient texts may not show her hurling thunderbolts, but her influence is felt in every tactical shift of the battle. It was her strategic wisdom, born from a mind that never succumbs to panic, that likely guided Zeus's initial assault, perhaps advising him to target the joints of the wings to limit Typhon's mobility, or to focus his bolts on the central heads to disorient the beast. She understood that a foe of such immense regenerative power could not be defeated by brute force alone. It required a plan, a vulnerability to be identified and exploited. This dynamic between father and daughter reveals the beautiful, necessary duality of ultimate victory. The myth argues that to overcome a threat that challenges existence itself, you need the perfect synthesis of two forces, the overwhelming power of Zeus and the impeccable strategy of Athena. Power without wisdom is just noise and destruction, easily outmaneuvered by a clever foe. Wisdom without the power to enact it is a frustrated shout into the wind, a brilliant plan with no means of execution. Together, they form an unstoppable synergy. Zeus provides the monumental strength to lift the mountain, but it is Athena's strategic mind that identifies exactly where and how to throw it to achieve a permanent victory. She is the unsung architect of the triumph, the mind behind the muscle, and her steadfastness served as a constant anchor for Zeus, a reminder of what they were fighting for when the shadow of doubt might have crept in. Furthermore, her role completes a profound thematic arc within the broader story of divine succession. Ouranos was overthrown by the cunning of Gaia and the sickle of Cronus. Cronus was in turn overthrown by the clever strategy of Metis and Zeus. Now, faced with a threat from the old order, Zeus does not face it alone like his predecessors. He is aided by his own daughter, the very embodiment of the strategic intelligence that secured his throne in the first place. This signifies an evolution from a cycle of violent overthrow to a system of collaborative defense. Athena, born from Zeus's own mind, represents the next stage of divine rule, an order maintained not just by strength but by intelligent foresight and unwavering courage. She is the protector of the civilized cosmos her father built, and her refusal to flee ensured that the light of reason would not be extinguished, even when the sun itself was blotted out by the wings of chaos. What makes this ancient tale feel so startlingly modern, so irresistibly compelling even now, is the way it masterfully inverts a classic narrative structure we all love. We're hardwired to cheer for the underdog, the little guy who defies the odds. Yet here, the underdog is the king of the cosmos himself. We witness the most powerful being in existence brought low, humiliated, and stripped of everything that makes him divine. We see him at his absolute weakest, a prisoner in the dark, and that vulnerability is the key that unlocks our empathy. It transforms Zeus from a remote, omnipotent statue into a relatable character on a hero's journey, one who must claw his way back from the brink not just with power but with heart and cunning. This isn't a story about an unchallengeable ruler. It's a story about a leader who fails, learns, adapts, and earns his victory the hardest way possible. Beyond the thrilling character arc, the myth delivers a narrative package that feels engineered for maximum engagement. It's a masterpiece of pacing and stakes. We get the terrifying monster introduction, the devastating first act where the hero is overthrown, the tense, stealthy rescue mission that plays out like a divine heist, and the final, explosive comeback that reshapes the very geography of the world. It blends genres seamlessly, combining epic fantasy with horror elements and a deeply satisfying redemption story. This structural perfection is why it has inspired countless modern stories, from the plot of a blockbuster superhero film to the multi-stage boss battle in a video game. The blueprint is all there, the seemingly unbeatable foe, the crushing low point, the crucial assist from allies, and the final victory that uses the villain's own power against them. At its heart, though, the story endures because its core themes are eternally human. It's a powerful allegory for resilience. It tells us that even when we are mutilated by life's challenges, when our own personal sinews of strength and confidence are cut, we can have them restored. It champions the profound value of allies, the clever Hermes, and the startling Pan in our own lives who see our potential even when we're trapped and who provide the unique skills we lack to get us back in the fight. Most importantly, it argues that true victory is never achieved by brute force alone. Zeus's initial, furious barrage of thunderbolts fails. His ultimate triumph comes from a combination of that restored power with strategic intelligence, using the environment and a clever trap to achieve what raw strength could not. It's a timeless lesson that the greatest challenges we face require both the brawn to act and the brains to plan. Ultimately, this is the story we tell ourselves to make sense of a chaotic world. The struggle between Zeus and Typhon is the ultimate metaphor for our daily battle to impose order on the chaos within and around us. We all have our personal Typhons, those overwhelming emotions, anxieties, and external crises that threaten to topple our internal Olympus. The myth assures us that while chaos is a permanent, simmering force in the universe, it can be contained, managed, and overcome. It doesn't promise that order will ever destroy chaos completely. Instead, it offers the more realistic and comforting hope that we can build mountains of resilience strong enough to keep it buried, even if we can still feel its rumble beneath our feet. This is why, after thousands of years, the tale still crackles with energy. It's not just a story about gods and monsters, but a mirror held up to our own endless human struggle for balance. And so, the dust settles on one of the most cataclysmic and defining battles in all of mythology. What began with the gods themselves fleeing in a blind, animal panic concludes with the ultimate triumph of cleverness and resolve over primal, overwhelming chaos. We witness the king of the gods brought to his lowest point, mutilated and imprisoned in the very darkness he sought to banish from the universe, only to be rescued by a brilliant heist orchestrated by the most unlikely of allies. His final victory, using the earth itself to forever trap his foe, wasn't just a display of power, it was a masterstroke of strategic genius that reshaped the very landscape and secured the cosmic order for eternity. This story is far more than an ancient blockbuster. It's the foundational myth that explained the volatile world to the ancient Greeks. Every rumble from beneath Sicily's Mount Etna was a reminder that the forces of chaos are never truly vanquished, only contained by the enduring strength of order. It cemented Zeus's rule not through fear, but by proving he alone possessed the resilience and cunning to protect creation from its greatest threat. This tale has echoed through millennia, inspiring artists, writers, and game developers because its core themes of overcoming despair with the help of allies and using wisdom to channel raw power are as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago. The world of mythology is filled with countless other legendary clashes just waiting to be explored. Which epic confrontation would you like to see us tackle next? Should we delve into the Norse prophecy of Ragnarok, where the gods face their doom in a final, fiery battle? Or perhaps the Celtic epic of the Táin Bó Cúailnge and the heroic stand of Cú Chulainn? Let us know your pick in the comments below. We love hearing from you. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Clash of Titans, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and that you've hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next mythological adventure. A like on this video really helps us out, and sharing it with a fellow mythology fan is the highest compliment. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, keep exploring the stories that